The air was thick, heavy with the scent of night-blooming jasmine and a perfume that I would come to associate with guilt. Her fingers traced a line from my shoulder down my chest, each touch a spark on my overheated skin, and her breath was a warm, wine-scented whisper against my ear. "Helen, we shouldn't... Please..." My voice was a choked sound, a pathetic attempt at resistance that neither of us believed. The rustle of silk sheets was the only answer for a moment, a sound that felt deafening in the quiet of the large, shadowed bedroom. A soft, almost mournful sigh escaped her lips before she spoke, her voice impossibly close. "Shh, my boy. Just for a moment. Let me forget." Her plea was not one of passion, but of desperation, and in that moment, my own weak resolve shattered into a million pieces. My hand, acting of its own accord, moved from pushing her away to pulling her closer, my fingers tangling in the soft, expensive fabric of her robe, my surrender as absolute as it was catastrophic. But that moment was an ending, not a beginning. Before that night, before the scent of her perfume became a permanent stain in my memory, there was another scent, the smell of freshly cut grass, of chlorine from the community pool, the cheap, sweet coconut sunscreen Chloe would always wear. 3 months earlier, I was just Liam, 21 years old, completely and hopelessly in love with a girl who was the human equivalent of sunshine. Chloe was my entire world, her laughter the only soundtrack I ever needed, and that summer was supposed to be ours. It stretched out before us, a golden road of late-night drives, shared ice cream cones, and lazy days by the lake. Our future felt as bright and certain as the July Sunday. The story of my downfall began on a perfect Saturday afternoon, the kind of day that feels engineered for happiness, as I drove my slightly beaten-up sedan through the winding, manicured streets of her parents' neighborhood. We were heading to their annual summer barbecue, an event I had been both nervous and excited about. Their house stood at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, a pristine, 2-story colonial that looked like it was pulled from a magazine, a perfect home for a perfect family. And as I parked the car, with Chloe humming along to the radio beside me, I had no idea I was driving into the heart of a storm, a quiet, devastating hurricane, disguised as a beautiful, lonely woman who was waiting just inside that perfect front door. I was a boy in love, walking into a paradise that I myself would soon set ablaze. Chloe unbuckled her seatbelt with a happy sigh, the sound pulling me from my thoughts as I killed the engine. "Ready?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with an excitement that I found infectious. I nodded, trying to match her energy, but a knot of nervous anticipation was tightening in my stomach. From the outside, her family home was an imposing picture of suburban perfection. The lawn was a flawless carpet of emerald green, the hedges were sculpted with geometric precision, and the white paint on the house seemed to gleam under the afternoon sunday. It felt less like a home and more like a statement, a testament to a life I couldn't yet imagine. The distant sound of cheerful chatter and the faint, savory aroma of grilling meat drifted from the backyard, promising a scene of idyllic family life. We walked hand in hand up the stone pathway, and as Chloe pushed open the heavy oak door, it felt like crossing a threshold into another world. The interior was just as immaculate. Cool, air-conditioned air washed over us, a relief from the summer heat. Everything was decorated in tasteful shades of beige and cream, with expensive-looking art on the walls and not a single object out of place. A man appeared from a hallway, phone pressed to his ear. He was tall and lean, with silvering hair at his temples, and a face that might have been handsome if it weren't set in a permanent expression of stern preoccupation. He wore a crisp, navy blue polo shirt and khaki trousers that screamed weekend wealth. He lowered the phone for a moment, his eyes scanning me with a swift, appraising glance. "Dad, this is Liam," Chloe said, her voice bright. He nodded, offering me his free hand. His grip was firm, dry, and brief. "David," he said, his name a simple statement of fact. "Good to meet you. Excuse me." And just like that, he turned, raising the phone back to his ear as he walked towards a closed office door, his muffled voice already barking instructions about quarterly reports and profit margins. The interaction lasted less than 10 seconds. Chloe gave me a small, apologetic smile, a look I would come to understand meant, that's just how we island. The king of the castle was present, but entirely absent. Then, A different presence emerged from the kitchen. The first thing I noticed was the scent, a subtle and intoxicating blend of vanilla and something floral I couldn't name. It arrived just before she did. Helen moved with a quiet grace that seemed at odds with the casual setting of a barbecue. She was wearing a simple, cream-colored linen sundress that fell to just below her knees, a dress that managed to be both elegant and effortlessly casual. Her dark hair was tied back in a loose, elegant knot at the nape of her neck, with a few errant strands framing a face that was strikingly beautiful. She had Chloe's warm eyes, but hers held a different quality, a depth that hinted at a quiet melancholy, a story that wasn't told in the bright, open pages of her daughter's face. A warm, welcoming smile lit up her features as she saw us. "There you are," she said, her voice a low, melodic hum. She embraced Chloe first, a genuine hug full of maternal affection. Then, she turned to me. "And you must be Liam. I've heard so much about you." She extended her hand, and I took it. Her skin was soft, her grip surprisingly firm, not the delicate, fragile handshake I might have expected. But it was what happened next that threw me off balance. She didn't let go immediately. Her hand lingered in mine for a fraction of a second too long, a pause that was almost imperceptible, yet stretched into an eternity. And her eyes. She looked directly into my eyes, and it wasn't a polite, social glance. It was a look of intense, focused scrutiny, as if she were trying to see past my nervous smile and into the very core of who I was. There was a flicker of something in their depths. Curiosity, yes, but also a flash of what I can only describe as a profound weariness, a longing that made me feel strangely exposed. A faint blush crept up my neck. I felt like a specimen under a microscope. Then, as quickly as it came, the intensity vanished. She released my hand, and her smile became perfectly pleasant again. "It's so wonderful to finally meet you," she said, her tone now that of any mother meeting her daughter's boyfriend. I managed to stammer a reply, something about it being a pleasure to meet her too, my heart thumping a little faster than it should have. I told myself it was just my nerves. I was in their house, I wanted to make a good impression. That's all it was. She was just being friendly, welcoming, it meant nothing. We moved through the house to the sprawling backyard patio, where the party was in full swing. A dozen or so relatives were scattered around, chatting, laughing, drinking chilled white wine. The scene was overwhelmingly perfect. The burgers sizzled on a massive stainless steel grill. A golden retriever dozed in a patch of shade, and little kids chased each other across the perfect lawn. I tried to relax, holding Chloe's hand as she introduced me to a whirlwind of aunts, uncles, and cousins whose names I immediately forgot. I played my part, the dutiful boyfriend, smiling, shaking hands, and answering the standard questions about my major and my summer plans. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every now and then, I would glance up and find Helen's eyes on me from across the patio. She would be in the middle of a conversation, laughing at a joke, but her gaze would be fixed on me, just for a moment, before she would look away. It was never overtly flirtatious, never inappropriate. It was quieter, more subtle than that. It was a persistent, unnerving awareness. Later, as I was standing alone by the drink station, refilling my cup with lemonade, she approached me. "Having a good time, Liam?" she asked, her voice soft beside me. I jumped slightly, not having heard her come up. "Yes, absolutely. It's a great party. You have a beautiful home," I replied, the standard polite response. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thank you. It's a lot of work to keep up appearances." There was a strange edge to her words, a hint of cynicism that seemed out of place. She looked out over the party, at her family laughing under the sun, and for a moment, her cheerful hostess mask slipped. I saw a profound loneliness in her expression. "Chloe is very lucky to have you," she said, turning her gaze back to me. "She's been so happy these past few months. You're a good man. I can see that." The compliment felt intensely personal, the way she said it. Her eyes held mine again, and that same feeling of being seen, of being deeply understood, washed over me. "I'm the lucky one," I said, feeling my cheeks grow warm again. "Your daughter's amazing." "Yes, she is," Helen agreed, her voice barely a whisper. "She still believes the world is a good place." Just then, one of her sisters called her name, and the moment was broken. She gave me a small, final smile and walked away, her cream-colored dress flowing behind her. I stood there for a long time, the plastic cup of lemonade cool in my hand, watching her rejoin the party, redonning her mask of effortless grace. As Chloe and I drove home that evening, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and pink, she squeezed my hand. "So, that wasn't so bad, was it? My mom loved you." I smiled back at her. "Yeah, it was great. Your family is great." But as I said the words, my mind wasn't on the aunts or the uncles or the perfect house. It was on Helen. On the handshake that lasted a second too long, on the unsettling intensity of her gaze, and on her strange, sad words by the drink station. I dismissed it as overthinking, as the natural anxiety of meeting the parents. She was just a lonely, middle-aged woman in a cold marriage who was happy her daughter had found a nice boyfriend. That was the simple, logical explanation. But deep down, a small, quiet part of me knew that I had misunderstood. I had seen a polite, welcoming mother. I had failed to see the patient fisherwoman who had just felt the first subtle tug on her line. That first meeting left a strange and subtle residue in my mind, a question mark I couldn't quite resolve, but the potent, undeniable reality of Chloe's love soon washed it away. The first few weeks of July unfolded in a sun-drenched haze of normalcy. I spent most of my days at her house, the allure of the pristine swimming pool and the fully stocked refrigerator being a significant upgrade from my cramped student apartment. Chloe and I were inseparable, living in that blissful bubble of young love where the rest of the world fades into a soft, unimportant blur. David, it turned out, was a man who existed more on speakerphone than in person. His booming voice would occasionally echo from his locked office, a disembodied sound of authority and commerce, but his physical presence was a rarity. He was a ghost in his own home, a provider of wealth but not of warmth, leaving a vacuum of space and silence in his wake. And into that vacuum, Helen seemed to expand. At first, our interactions were exactly what you'd expect, polite, brief, and always centered around Chloe. She would offer me a cold drink, ask about my classes, praise my swimming form with a pleasant maternal smile. She was the perfect hostess, a constant, graceful presence moving in the background of my summer romance. But as the days grew longer and hotter, the dynamic began to shift in ways I was too naive to recognize. I started to notice the patterns of her solitude. While Chloe and I would be laughing and splashing in the pool, I'd see Helen in the distance, meticulously tending to her rose garden, her movements slow and deliberate, a portrait of lonely elegance. Or I'd find her in the shaded sunroom, curled up in a large armchair with a book, a forgotten cup of tea cooling on the table beside her. She never seemed to demand attention, yet her quiet, isolated presence became increasingly loud to me. The change began in the garden. One sweltering afternoon, Chloe had to run out to meet a friend from her art class, leaving me to lounge by the pool alone. I grew restless and wandered over to the elaborate rose garden where Helen was struggling to move a large, heavy terracotta pot. She was wearing a simple gray t-shirt, stained with sweat and dirt, and a pair of denim shorts that revealed the surprisingly toned, athletic shape of her legs. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and a smudge of soil marked one of her high cheekbones. Seeing her like this, stripped of her usual elegant attire, made her seem more real, more approachable. "Need a hand with that?" I asked, walking over. She looked up, startled, and a genuine, unpracticed smile touched her lips. "Liam, I'd love one, thank you. This thing weighs a ton." I lifted the pot easily, moving it to the spot she indicated. My muscles strained slightly under the weight, a fact that didn't go unnoticed. "Oh, wow," she said, her voice a mix of gratitude and something else, something appraising. "You're strong." She reached out and placed a hand on my bicep, a fleeting, casual touch. "Thank you, really." Her fingers were cool against my warm skin, and the brief contact sent an unexpected jolt through me. I lingered, making small talk about the roses. She spoke about them with a quiet passion, explaining the different varieties, the challenges of keeping them healthy. "David thinks it's a silly waste of time," she said, her voice dropping slightly as she snipped a withered bloom. "He wanted to pave it all over, put in a putting green." She laughed, but it was a brittle, humorless sound. "This garden, it's the only thing around here that's really mine." She looked at me then, her gaze direct and vulnerable. It's the only place I can make something beautiful grow. In that moment, I wasn't just Chloe's boyfriend making polite conversation. I was a confidant, a witness to a crack in the perfect facade. I felt a surge of sympathy for her, a protective instinct that was both new and confusing. I saw the lonely woman, not just the beautiful mother. I started to seek out those moments. When Chloe was busy, I'd find a reason to talk to Helen. I helped her carrying groceries. I fixed a wobbly leg on a patio chair. I listened as she told me stories about her childhood. The conversations deepened one overcast afternoon by the pool. A summer storm was brewing, the air thick and charged with electricity. Chloe was on a long phone call with her best friend, pacing back and forth on the far side of the lawn, leaving Helen and me sitting under the large patio umbrella. She was wearing a modest, navy blue one-piece swimsuit, partly covered by a white, translucent sarong tied at her waist. She was reading a novel, but I could tell she wasn't concentrating. She sighed, placing the book face down on her lap. "What do you want to be, Liam?" When all this, she gestured vaguely towards my college textbooks, is over. The question surprised me with its directness. We talked about my ambitions, my desire to be a journalist, to travel, to tell important stories. She listened with an intensity that was intoxicating. She didn't just hear my words, she seemed to absorb them, her eyes fixed on my face, nodding, asking thoughtful follow-up questions. She made me feel interesting, important. She made me feel like a man. Then, she turned the conversation, her voice becoming soft and wistful. "I was going to be an art historian," she said, looking out at the darkening sky. "My dream was to live in a small apartment in Florence, spending my days in the Uffizi Gallery. I could speak almost fluent Italian." A sad smile played on her lips. "Then I met David at a party. He was so ambitious, so confident. He swept me off my feet. He promised me the world." She paused, tracing the rim of her water glass with a single, elegant finger, and he gave it to me. This house, the cars, the clubs. He gave me everything except what I actually wanted. She looked at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "He never asks me what I want to be." The confession hung in the humid air between us, a shocking, intimate revelation. I was paralyzed, unsure of what to say. This was a truth I was sure she had never even shared with Chloe. I felt a profound, dangerous sense of privilege. I was being allowed into a secret, hidden part of her life. I mumbled something inadequate about being sorry, and she just shook her head, offering me a watery smile. "Don't be sorry, Liam. It's just nice to say it out loud to someone who actually listens." The first drops of rain began to fall, fat and heavy, spattering on the stone patio around us. The sound seemed to underscore the weight of her words. As we gathered our things to head inside, her hand brushed against mine, a touch that felt anything but accidental. The seeds of a dangerous intimacy had been sown, not in passion, but in the fertile ground of her loneliness and my flattered, youthful ego. I was no longer an innocent bystander in her life. I had become a character in her secret, unspoken story. And God help me, I wanted to know what happened next. The calendar turned to August, and the summer, which had once seemed an endless expanse of golden days, began to feel finite. A sense of urgency crept in, a feeling that we had to cram as much life as possible into the remaining weeks. It was this feeling that propelled Chloe to apply for a week-long intensive internship at a prestigious art gallery in New York City. When she got the acceptance email, she was ecstatic, jumping into my arms with a squeal of pure joy. I was genuinely thrilled for her. It was a huge opportunity, a stepping stone for the brilliant future that I knew she deserved. We spent her last evening together packing her suitcase, a chaotic mess of clothes and optimistic dreams spread across her bedroom floor. We ordered pizza, talked about how much we would miss each other, and made plans for all the things we would do the moment she got back. The air was filled with a sweet, tender melancholy. "Will you be okay without me for a whole week?" she asked, her head resting on my chest as we lay on her bed. "Try not to miss me too much." I kissed the top of her head, inhaling the familiar, comforting scent of her shampoo. "I'll survive," I whispered, "but it'll be tough." I truly believed it. I couldn't imagine a day, let alone a week, without her. The first 24 hours after she left were a study in emptiness. The silence in my small apartment, usually a welcome reprieve, felt oppressive and heavy. Her side of the bed was cold. The rhythm of my days was thrown off completely. I tried to focus on my summer reading list, but the words blurred together. I played video games until my eyes burned, but the digital victories felt hollow. The world seemed to have lost its color. I missed her laugh, her touch, the simple, grounding presence of her. I was adrift in a sea of boredom and a loneliness that was deeper than I had anticipated. I was just about to give in and order a greasy, consoling pizza on the second night of her absence when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. I glanced at the screen, expecting it to be Chloe with her nightly check-in call, but it wasn't her name that glowed on the screen. It was Helen's. My heart gave a strange little flutter. She had never called me before. I hesitated for a moment before answering, a flicker of unease darting through me. "Hello?" I said, trying to sound casual. "Liam? It's Helen. I hope I'm not disturbing you." Her voice was different over the phone. It was lower, slower than I was used to, and there was a slight, almost imperceptible slur to her words, as if they were wrapped in velvet. It was the sound of evening wine and solitude. "No, not at all," I replied. "Is everything okay?" There was a pause on her end, and for a second I could hear the faint clinking of ice in a glass. "Oh, everything's fine, dear. I was just calling to check on you. I know how quiet it can get when Chloe's away. This old house feels like a mausoleum." She laughed, a soft, breathy sound that held no humor. "I imagine you must be lonely over there, all by yourself." Her words were a direct hit, landing squarely on the truth of how I was feeling. "A little," I admitted. "It's definitely quiet." "Well," she continued, her voice taking on a conspiratorial tone, "I've done a very silly thing. I completely forgot that David was in Singapore this week, and I cooked enough for an army. I have a roasted chicken here that is far too delicious to eat all by myself." Another pause, this one more deliberate, more calculated. "I was wondering, if you aren't busy, of course, if you'd like to come over and keep an old woman company. I can't bear the thought of all this food going to waste." The invitation hung in the air, seemingly innocent, wrapped in the guise of maternal concern and practicality. But my internal alarms began to sound, a low, persistent hum of warning. Going to dinner, alone, with my girlfriend's mother. It felt strange. It felt like crossing a line, a boundary that was invisible but very, very real. 1,000 excuses ran through my head. "I have to study. I'm not feeling well. I already have plans." "Oh, Liam, I shouldn't have asked," she said quickly, as if sensing my hesitation. Her voice was suddenly filled with a theatrical fragility. "It was a silly idea. Please don't feel obligated. I'll be perfectly fine. Forget I said anything." Her retreat was a masterful move of emotional chess. Instantly, my hesitation was reframed. Saying no was no longer about maintaining appropriate boundaries. It was about rejecting a lonely woman who had reached out with a kind gesture. It would be cruel. It would be impolite. And what was the real harm, anyway? My mind began to race, building a fortress of rationalizations. It's just dinner. She's my girlfriend's mom, not some stranger. She's clearly lonely with her husband gone all the time. I'm just being a good guy, a thoughtful person. It's better than sitting here alone. It would be weirder to make up a lame excuse. I was convincing myself that my motives were pure, that I was acting out of chivalry and kindness. But the narrator I am today, the man looking back through the smoky lens of regret, knows the truth. I was lying to myself. Underneath all the noble justifications, there was a dark, thrilling current of curiosity. I was flattered by her attention. I was intrigued by the secret sadness in her eyes. I was drawn to the danger she represented, a danger I refused to acknowledge. "No, not at all," I heard myself say, the words feeling foreign in my own mouth. "That sounds really nice, Helen. I'd love to." "Oh, wonderful," she breathed, the relief in her voice palpable. "Come around 8? After we hung up, I stood in the middle of my silent apartment, the phone feeling heavy in my hand. A strange mixture of dread and exhilaration churned in my stomach. I had made a choice. I had consciously decided to walk towards the edge, telling myself I was only going to look over. I spent the next hour in a state of nervous agitation. I showered, taking far more care with my appearance than was necessary for a casual dinner. I changed my shirt 3 times, settling on a simple black t-shirt that I thought made me look older, more mature. The entire drive over, a 15-minute journey, felt like an hour. The familiar streets of her neighborhood seemed different in the encroaching twilight. The houses, usually so welcoming, now seemed to hold their secrets behind dark windows. I turned onto her street, my hands slick with sweat on the steering wheel. As I pulled into the long, curving driveway, I saw that the house was mostly dark, save for the warm golden light spilling from the downstairs windows, a beacon in the quiet night. It looked intimate, isolated. It no longer felt like Chloe's family home. It felt like Helen's house. I killed the engine and sat for a moment in the sudden silence, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was a fool, a willing, eager fool, convincing myself that the fire I was approaching wouldn't burn me. I finally got out of the car, the humid August air thick around me, and walked up the stone pathway. I stood on the doorstep of my own destruction, and I lifted my hand, and I rang the bell to be let in. The sound of the doorbell seemed to echo for an eternity in the silent evening. When the door swung open, the man I thought I was, the loyal boyfriend, the good guy, ceased to exist. He was annihilated in an instant by the woman who stood before me. This was not the lonely gardener in a dirt-stained t-shirt, nor the polite hostess in a modest sundress. The woman in the doorway was a different creature entirely. Helen was wearing a dress the color of deep, dark wine, a slip of red silk that clung to her body, outlining the gentle curve of her hips and the fullness of her breasts. It was sleeveless, revealing toned arms and shoulders that glowed in the soft, warm light of the foyer. Her hair was down, falling in dark, glossy waves, and she wore makeup that made her eyes look larger, deeper, and infinitely more dangerous. The scent I had come to associate with her, that vanilla and floral perfume, was stronger now, a deliberate and intoxicating cloud that seemed to pull me in. She smiled, a slow, knowing smile that was not maternal in any way. "Liam," she said, her voice a low purr. "I'm so glad you came. Please, come in." I stepped inside, my throat suddenly dry. The house was transformed. The bright, airy space I knew was now a landscape of shadows and intimate golden light. Soft jazz played from unseen speakers. The long, formal dining table, usually set for a large family, was now set for only 2, at one end, with flickering candles casting dancing shadows on the walls. It felt less like a dinner and more like a carefully constructed stage, and I was the unwitting actor who had just walked into the scene. "Can I get you some wine?" she asked, already moving towards a bottle of red that was breathing on the sideboard. I simply nodded, unable to form words. She poured 2 glasses, her movements fluid and mesmerizing, the red silk of her dress shifting with every step. She handed me a glass, her fingers brushing against mine. The contact was electric, a spark of warning that I chose to ignore. The dinner that followed was a blur. The roasted chicken was, as she had promised, delicious, but I barely tasted it. My senses were entirely consumed by her. She guided the conversation with expert precision, keeping the wine flowing freely. My glass never seemed to be empty. She drew out my dreams, my fears, my ambitions, making me feel like the most fascinating man in the world. And then, slowly, she began to talk about herself. She painted a bleak, heartbreaking picture of her marriage, not with anger, but with a profound, elegant sadness that was far more potent. She spoke of a loneliness so deep it felt like a physical ache, of living with a man who shared her house but not her life. "He looks at me, but he doesn't see me," she said, her voice soft and laced with pain as she stared into the candle flame. "Sometimes I think if I just disappeared, it would take him a week to notice." She looked up, and her eyes, shining with unshed tears, found mine across the table. "You see me, Liam, don't you?" And in that moment, full of wine and a misplaced sense of heroic empathy, I felt a powerful, dangerous connection to this beautiful, sad woman. I was her confidant, her savior. After dinner, she suggested we move to the living room, where a low fire was crackling in the hearth despite the summer heat. As she stood up, she feigned a moment of dizziness, her hand flying to her head. "Whoops, too much wine," she murmured, lurching slightly. I shot up from my chair to steady her, my hands finding her waist. The silk of her dress was cool and smooth beneath my palms, but the body underneath was warm and very real. She leaned against me, her head resting on my shoulder for a single, charged moment. I could feel the softness of her breast press against my arm. "Thank you," she whispered, her breath warm against my neck. She didn't move away. Instead, she turned in my arms, her body now flush against mine. She raised a hand to my cheek, her thumb gently stroking my skin. "You are such a good boy, Liam," she said, her voice thick with a meaning that had nothing to do with being good. And then she kissed me. It wasn't a tentative, hesitant kiss. It was a kiss of deep, soul-crushing hunger, of years of pent-up loneliness and desire being unleashed. My mind screamed, a frantic, panicked chorus of, "No, this is wrong, this is Chloe's mother," but the protest was drowned out by a tidal wave of sensation I had never known. Her mouth was soft and tasted of red wine. Her body, a woman's body, felt intoxicatingly different against my own. This wasn't the sweet, innocent affection I shared with Chloe. This was something dark, desperate, and overwhelmingly adult. For a horrifying, exhilarating moment, I kissed her back. I surrendered. My hands moved from her waist to her back, pulling her closer, my body betraying every promise I had ever made. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. She looked at me, her lips slightly swollen, her eyes dark with triumph and need. There were no more words. She took my hand, her grip firm and certain, and led me from the room, up the grand, curving staircase, and towards the quiet darkness of the master bedroom. The room was vast, dominated by a large bed with a dark wood headboard and what looked like 1,000 pillows. The only light came from a single lamp on the nightstand, casting everything in a soft, forgiving glow. The air smelled of her. She turned to face me, and with a slow, deliberate movement, she reached for the thin straps of her dress. The red silk whispered down her body, pooling at her feet like blood. Underneath, she was wearing a black lace bra and matching underwear, a stark, deliberate armor of seduction. It was so different from the simple, pretty cotton things Chloe wore. This was the lingerie of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. My breath caught in my throat. She was beautiful, her body softer and more curved than Chloe's, the body of a woman who had lived, who had given birth. Her breasts were full and round, barely contained by the delicate lace, and her hips flared in a way that made my hands ache to touch them. Chloe. I whispered her name, a last, desperate prayer from a drowning man. Helen came to me, placing a finger on my lips to silence me. "She isn't here," she whispered, her voice a raw, husky sound. "Tonight, there is only us." She unbuttoned my shirt, her fingers nimble and sure, and I let her. I let her push the shirt from my shoulders, let her unbuckle my belt. I was a passenger in my own body, watching my own damnation unfold. Her touch was fire, her mouth a brand. Every nerve ending was alight with a toxic mixture of guilt and pure, unadulterated lust. We fell onto the bed, a tangle of limbs and desperate whispers. My weak protests of Helen. "We can't. This is wrong," were swallowed by her kisses, answered by her moans. Her sounds were not of resistance, but of a desperate, starved pleasure. "Don't stop," she breathed against my skin. "Please, Liam, you feel so good. Please don't stop." In that room, on that bed, I betrayed every good thing I had in my life. And the most terrible part, the part that will haunt me until the day I die, is that in that moment of ultimate sin, as pleasure overwhelmed every last shred of my conscience, it felt like heaven. I awoke not to the gentle embrace of a shared bed, but to the sharp, unforgiving pain of a crick in my neck. The morning sun, a harsh accuser, streamed through the large living room windows, slicing across my face and forcing my eyes open. For a disorienting second, I didn't know where I was. The ceiling was too high, the air smelled faintly of yesterday's fire and a lingering, ghostly trace of her perfume. I was on the sofa, the grand, expensive leather sofa. I was fully dressed, my clothes a rumpled, disgusting mess. Then, like a physical blow to the stomach, the memory of the night before crashed down on me. The red dress, the wine, the staircase, her bed. The sickening, detailed montage played out in my head, and a wave of pure, undiluted self-loathing washed over me. so intense it made me physically nauseous. I had not woken up beside her. Sometime in the dark, final hours of the night, one of us had moved me down here, a silent, clinical severing of the intimacy we had shared. It was a clear message. The passion was for the night, but the morning was for propriety. The illusion was over. My first coherent thought was an animalistic urge to flee. I needed to get out of that house before she came downstairs, before I had to face the reality of her in the sober light of day. As I scrambled to my feet, my head throbbing with a vicious hangover, I saw it. On the polished surface of the coffee table lay a single sheet of thick, cream-colored stationery. Her handwriting was a series of elegant, controlled loops, a stark contrast to the chaotic mess she had made of my life. The note contained only 5 words. "Thank you for last night." There was no regret, no apology, no acknowledgement of the cataclysmic transgression we had committed. It was a receipt, a polite, formal acknowledgement of services rendered. It was the coldest, most terrifying thing I had ever read. It sealed the event in a block of ice, making it real, immutable. It wasn't a drunken mistake, it was a transaction. I didn't even stop to find my shoes. I just grabbed them and ran. I fumbled with the lock on the heavy front door, my hands shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to open it. The moment I stepped outside, the humid morning air felt like a slap in the face. The world looked obscenely normal. A neighbor was getting his newspaper, birds were chirping, sprinklers were whispering across a perfect lawn. No one knew that the boy walking barefoot down the stone path was a fraud, a monster hiding in plain sight. The drive home was a paranoid blur. Every passing car felt like an accusation. I imagined people looking at me, seeing the guilt written all over my face. The scent of her was all over me, clinging to my clothes, my skin, my hair. I could still taste the wine in the back of my throat. I was a walking, breathing vessel of my own betrayal, and I was desperate to exorcise it. The moment I was back inside the sanctuary of my own apartment, I began a frantic ritual of purification. I tore off the contaminated clothes, my black t-shirt and jeans, and threw them into the washing machine, pouring in a reckless amount of detergent, as if I could bleach the sin out of the fabric. Then I stood in the shower, the water as hot as I could bear it, and scrubbed my skin until it was raw and red. I washed my hair 3 times, trying to scrub her scent, the memory of her fingers tangling in it, out of my head. But it was useless. The filth wasn't on my skin. It was inside me, a permanent stain on my soul. I wrapped myself in a clean towel and collapsed onto my bed, my body trembling, my mind a chaotic storm of shame. For a brief, fragile moment, I tried to bargain with myself, with the universe. It was a one-time thing, a terrible, horrible mistake that would never happen again. I would bury it. I would lock it in a box in the deepest part of my mind and never speak of it, never think of it again. I would be a better boyfriend to Chloe. I would devote my life to making her happy, a secret penance for my unforgivable sin. It could be contained. It could be forgotten. And then my phone buzzed on the nightstand. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. My whole body went rigid. I stared at it, my heart hammering against my ribs. I knew who it was before I even looked. Her name glowed on the screen. Helen. My hand trembled as I reached for it, a terrible, magnetic pull forcing me to look. It was a text message. 6 words that shattered my fragile hope of containment. 6 words that chained me to her and to my crime. I can't stop thinking about you. I read the message once, twice, 10 times. It wasn't a question. It wasn't an apology. It was a claim. A statement of intent. This wasn't over. This was the beginning. A cold dread, far worse than the frantic guilt I'd been feeling, settled deep in my bones. This wasn't a secret I could just bury. It was a living thing, and it was in my pocket. That evening, Chloe called, her voice a bright, cheerful beacon from a world of innocence I was no longer a part of. "Hi, I miss you. How was your night?" The simple, loving questions were instruments of torture. I felt a physical pain in my chest, a crushing weight of deceit. "It was fine," I said, my voice sounding hollow and strange in my own ears. "Quiet. Just, studied a bit, watched a movie." The lie came out surprisingly easily, the first brick in the massive wall I would have to build between us. She chattered on, about the gallery, about the funny thing her roommate did, her voice so full of life and trust. "I was thinking about you all day. she said, her voice soft and intimate. I love you so much. Each word was a fresh cut. I was a fraud, listening to a declaration of love from the girl I had so completely and utterly betrayed just hours before. I felt like a spectator watching a film of my own life, a life I was no longer worthy of living. I love you too. I managed to choke out, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. Are you okay? She asked, a flicker of concern in her voice. You sound kind of weird. Are you getting sick? No, I'm fine, I lied again, the second brick slotting neatly into place. Just tired. After we hung up, I sat in the darkness of my clean apartment for a long time, the phone clutched in my hand. The secret was no longer a memory. It was an active, malignant presence. The real punishment I was beginning to understand wasn't going to be about getting caught. It was the unending, daily torment of living this lie. It was the agony of knowing that every time Chloe looked at me with love in her eyes, she was looking at a ghost. The day Chloe came back was one of the most difficult of my life. I stood at the bus terminal, forcing a smile onto my face that felt like a brittle, cracking mask. When she stepped off the bus, her face lighting up the moment she saw me, a wave of such profound guilt and love washed over me that I almost buckled. She ran into my arms, and as I held her, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, I felt like the world's greatest imposter. Her hug was pure, her joy was real, and my embrace was a lie. Her first kiss, the one I had been longing for and dreading in equal measure, tasted like ashes. I missed you so much, she whispered against my lips, and every word was a hot coal against my conscience. I was a holy site that had been desecrated, and here was the true believer, praying at a ruined altar. Life fell back into its summer rhythm, but for me, everything was irrevocably altered. Being at her house was a new form of exquisite torture. It was now a stage for a silent, terrifying play where I was the only actor who knew the full script. Helen was a master of her craft. To Chloe, she was the doting mother, asking about New York, complimenting her new haircut, the picture of maternal love. But to me, she was a constant, unnerving presence. She would catch my eye over the top of Chloe's head at the dinner table, a tiny, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. She would brush past me in the hallway, her arm accidentally grazing mine, sending a jolt of illicit electricity through my body that made me feel sick with shame. These were tiny, secret acknowledgments of our shared crime, invisible threads connecting us that pulled tighter and tighter with each passing day. I felt like I was losing my mind, trapped in a panopticon of my own making, with her as the sole, all-seeing warden. My phone, once a source of connection to Chloe, became an instrument of terror. The texts started again, a slow, steady drip of poison into my life. At first, they were subtle. So lovely to see you looking so happy today. Then, they grew bolder, more possessive. One evening, while I was sitting on the sofa with Chloe, her head on my lap as we watched a movie, my phone buzzed. The message from Helen read, "I remember what your skin felt like under my hands." I nearly dropped the phone. My blood ran cold. Chloe looked up at me. "Everything okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a laugh. "Yeah, just a spam email." The lie slid out, another brick in the wall. The texts became more demanding. "I need you. I can't sleep." I keep thinking about that night. I tried to ignore them, leaving her messages unread for hours, then days. But my silence only seemed to embolden her. Her messages took on a sharper edge. "Don't ignore me, Liam. We need to talk." Fear began to curdle in my stomach. It was no longer just the fear of our secret. It was the fear of her. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night. Chloe had a late study session at the university library with a group for a big project. She kissed me goodbye, promising to be home before midnight. The moment the door closed behind her, I felt a sense of relief and dread. 10 minutes later, my phone lit up. It was Helen. "She's gone for at least 3 hours. I need to see you." My fingers trembled as I typed back, "We can't. This is crazy." Her reply was instant. "It's crazier to pretend it didn't happen." Parker Point, the lookout at the end of Ridge Road. 10 minutes. Be there. It wasn't a request, it was a command, laced with an unspoken threat. What would happen if I said no? Would she tell Chloe? Would she blow up my entire world out of spite? I looked at my reflection in the dark screen of my phone, and I didn't recognize the pale, haunted face staring back at me. The part of me that was still good, the part that still loved Chloe with a fierce, protective loyalty, screamed at me to stay put, to turn off my phone, to end this madness. But another part of me, a dark, self-destructive, and shamefully curious part, was already grabbing my car keys. It was an addiction. I hated the feeling, but my body craved the fix, the adrenaline, the sheer obliterating intensity of the transgression. Parker Point was a local lover's lane, a dark, deserted gravel turnout overlooking the distant lights of the city. Her sleek, dark sedan was already there, a shadow amongst shadows. I pulled up beside her, my headlights illuminating her car for a moment before I cut the engine, plunging us back into near total darkness. A moment later, my passenger door opened, and she slid into the seat beside me, bringing a gust of night air and her intoxicating perfume into the small, confined space of my car. She was wearing simple dark jeans and a black silk blouse. She didn't say hello, she just looked at me, her eyes searching my face in the dim light from the dashboard. "This is insane, Helen," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "I know," she said, her voice low and steady. I tried to stay away. I couldn't. There was no seduction this time, no wine, no elegant dance of words. This was something raw, more desperate. It was the meeting of two addicts, two people drawn together by a shared sickness. She leaned across the center console and her mouth found mine. The kiss was not like the first one. It was frantic, hungry, almost violent. It was a kiss that wasn't meant to entice, but to consume. The next few minutes were a clumsy, desperate frenzy. The cramped space of the car became our sordid little world. The steering wheel pressed into my back, the gear shift dug into her leg, but we didn't care. It was a frantic, graceless struggle of tangled limbs and fumbled clothing, the antithesis of the luxurious, sensual encounter in her bedroom. This was ugly, this was cheap. And yet, the sheer risk of it, the sordidness, the possibility of headlights flashing across us at any moment, heightened every sensation to an almost unbearable degree. The windows began to fog over, encasing us in a claustrophobic, steamy bubble of our own shame. Her hands were everywhere, urgent and demanding, and mine, to my eternal disgrace, answered in kind. Her blouse came unbuttoned, and in the faint moonlight, I saw the pale gleam of her skin, the dark lace of her bra. Her full breast pressed against my chest, the feeling sending another jolt of corrupting pleasure through me. My hand slid down her back, over the curve of her hip, and the denim that covered her round, soft flesh. Every touch was a fresh betrayal, every gasp a nail in the coffin of my former self. This wasn't about love or even affection. It was a raw, physical exorcism of a need we had created in each other. It was over almost as quickly as it began, a frantic, shuddering release that left us both breathless and spent. The silence that followed was heavier and more suffocating than the passion had been. We were two separate, guilty people again, sitting in the dark, the evidence of our sin fogging the windows around us. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing to say. The elegance was gone, the fantasy was shattered. All that was left was the cheap, ugly truth. Finally, she was the one to move, pulling her clothes back into place with a series of sharp, efficient movements. She didn't look at me. "You should go," she said, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Chloe will be wondering where you are." She opened the car door, and without another word, without a backward glance, she got out and walked to her own car. I watched as her taillights flared to life and then disappeared down the dark road, leaving me alone in the suffocating silence. I sat there for a long time, my head resting against the cool glass of the driver's side window. The first time I had told myself was a mistake, a catastrophic, life-altering lapse in judgment. But this was different. This was a decision. This was a choice, made with a clear head and a guilty heart. This was the moment I stopped being a boy who had made a terrible mistake and became a man who was having an affair. I had a new name for myself now: cheater, liar. And as I started the car and drove away from that dark, lonely place, I knew with a chilling certainty that it was a name I would carry for the rest of my life. If the first act of my betrayal was a lightning strike, a sudden, violent event that left a smoking crater in the landscape of my life, the affair itself was the fallout, a toxic rain that began to seep into the soil, poisoning everything that was supposed to grow. The second encounter in the car had solidified my new identity. I was no longer an innocent who had stumbled. I was a willing participant in a sordid, ongoing deception. This knowledge changed the very chemistry of my being. I began to exist as two separate people. There was the smiling, attentive boyfriend, the Liam that Chloe knew and loved, who went through the motions of a perfect summer romance. And then there was the other one, the real one, a hollowed-out shell of a man, a ghost haunted by his own choices, who stood behind the mask and watched the performance with a cold, detached horror. The most immediate and devastating casualty was my intimacy with Chloe. The paradise we had built together, a world founded on trust and effortless affection, became a minefield. Her touch, which had once been my greatest comfort, now felt like a brand. One evening, we were in her room, the soft lamplight creating the kind of cozy, intimate atmosphere that used to be our sanctuary. She was curled up against me, her fingers tracing idle patterns on my chest, her head resting on my shoulder. It was a perfect picture of young love, but all I could feel was a suffocating sense of fraudulence. I was acutely aware of my own body, of the skin that her mother had touched, of the mouth that had kissed hers. I felt contaminated, unworthy. She shifted, turning to face me, her eyes soft and full of love. "I've missed this," she whispered, leaning in to kiss me. As her lips met mine, a jolt of revulsion and panic went through me. My mind was instantly flooded with images I was desperate to forget. The scent of Helen's perfume, the taste of red wine, the feel of her silk dress. I flinched, pulling back instinctively before I could stop myself. The hurt in her eyes was immediate and sharp. "What is it?" she asked, her voice small. "Nothing," I said, the lie tasting like gravel. I have a headache." It was the lamest, most transparent excuse, and we both knew it. "You have a lot of headaches lately," she said, a new and unfamiliar edge of suspicion in her voice. She pulled away from me completely, the warm space between us suddenly feeling like a frigid, empty chasm. "Liam, what's going on with you? Do you not want me anymore?" The question hung in the air, a devastating accusation. I wanted to scream, to confess everything, to tell her that I wanted her more than anything, but that I was drowning in a sea of my own filth. Instead, I built the wall higher. "Of course I want you," I said, the words feeling hollow and rehearsed. "Don't be silly. I'm just stressed about school starting. I'm sorry." I reached for her, but she stayed where she was, the invisible distance between us now a palpable force. She didn't believe me. And in that moment, I realized with a sickening certainty that I was losing her, not to a dramatic revelation, but to this slow, creeping poison of my own deceit. My entire life became a frantic exercise in information management. My phone was no longer a tool of communication. It was a ticking bomb I carried in my pocket. I lived in constant, low-grade terror of it. A casual buzz could be a loving message from Chloe or a clandestine summons from Helen. I developed a series of paranoid rituals. I deleted every text and every call from Helen the moment I received them. I put my phone on silent whenever I was with Chloe, often placing it face down on the table, a gesture she quickly began to notice. "Why do you always hide your phone now?" she asked once, half-jokingly. "Got secrets you're keeping from me?" I laughed it off, my heart hammering in my chest, but the joke landed like a stone in my stomach. I was jumpy, irritable, my nerves frayed to the breaking point. Sleep offered little escape, my dreams often a chaotic hellscape of fogged-up car windows and Chloe's crying face. The strain inevitably began to crack the surface of our relationship, leading to arguments over nothing. One afternoon, we were deciding on a movie to watch. It was a trivial, meaningless choice, but I was distracted, my mind replaying a curt, demanding text Helen had sent an hour earlier. Chloe suggested a romantic comedy, and I snapped. "Can we watch something that isn't so stupid and predictable for once?" The harshness in my voice shocked both of us. Her face fell. "It was just a suggestion, Liam. You don't have to be a jerk about it." "Well, I'm sick of you treating me like a kid who only wants to watch cartoons," I retorted, the anger coming from a dark, guilty place deep inside me, having nothing to do with her or the movie. The argument escalated, a pointless, ugly spiral of accusations. "You're not even here anymore," she cried, her voice cracking with a frustration that had been building for weeks. "You're in this room, but you're a million miles away. What is wrong with you?" I had no answer. I couldn't tell her the truth, so I just stood there trapped in a miserable, guilty silence. The fight ended, as they all did, with no resolution, just another layer of resentment and misunderstanding solidifying between us. All the while, Helen watched from the sidelines, a silent, satisfied observer of the chaos she had orchestrated. She would play the part of the concerned mother, offering me a sympathetic look after Chloe stormed out of the room. "Teenage drama," she might murmur, placing a cool hand on my arm. "Don't worry, Liam. She'll get over it." Her feigned sympathy was a grotesque parody, a twisted display of her power. She was reminding me that she was the cause of this misery, that she was the one pulling the strings, and that I was utterly, completely trapped. The beautiful suburban house, the sun-drenched pool, the manicured gardens, this paradise I had once admired was now my prison. The sun felt too bright, the water felt too cold, and the scent of the roses in the garden only reminded me of the woman who tended them. The affair was no longer a series of stolen, illicit moments. It was a constant, corrosive presence. It was the poison in our food, the static in our conversations, the ghost in our bed. I was watching the best thing in my life wither and die before my very eyes, and I was the one holding the vial of poison. The affair, by its very nature, existed in stolen pockets of time, secret texts, clandestine meetings in dark cars. But this routine of risk began to breed a terrifying complacency, particularly in Helen. For me, the fear was a constant, grinding weight, but for her, it seemed to have metastasized into a kind of reckless, manic energy. The thrill of the game was no longer enough. She felt the need to play it on an increasingly dangerous field, to bring the transgression closer and closer to the heart of her home, to the very people we were betraying. I was a moth drawn to a flame, and she was the arsonist, determined to see how large a fire we could start before the entire forest burned down. The close call, the moment the game stopped being a game, happened on a lazy, sun-drenched Saturday afternoon. It was the epitome of a perfect domestic day, which made the horror of it all the more grotesque. Chloe was upstairs in her room, listening to music and working on a project for her art class. David, in a rare weekend appearance, was cloistered in his home office, the muffled sounds of a conference call occasionally bleeding from under the door. I was in the kitchen making a sandwich, feeling a deceptive sense of calm. The geography of the house had placed everyone in their separate corners. The danger felt contained. I was just Liam, Chloe's boyfriend, making a snack in her parents' beautiful kitchen. For a few minutes, the lie felt almost real. Then, Helen walked in. She had been outside gardening, and she had a smudge of dirt on her cheek and a strange, feverish brightness in her eyes. She put her gloves on the counter and came to stand close to me, too close. "Chloe's busy?" she asked, her voice a low murmur. I nodded, my body tensing. "And David's on the phone with Hong Kong for at least another hour," she added, her eyes gleaming with the knowledge. She was mapping out the opportunity, the window of risk. My heart began to beat a little faster. "Helen, don't," I whispered, a weak preventative plea. She ignored me. "I need you to help me with something in the laundry room," she said, her voice a stage whisper. "I can't reach the detergent on the top shelf." It was the flimsiest of pretexts. I knew it, and she knew that I knew it. But I followed her anyway, a condemned man walking willingly toward his own execution. The laundry room was a small, windowless space just off the kitchen, filled with the clean, chemical scent of fabric softener and the low, rumbling hum of the dryer. The moment the door swung shut behind us, plunging us into the stark fluorescent light, she abandoned all pretense. She didn't ask for help. She simply turned and pressed her body against mine, backing me up against the vibrating warmth of the washing machine. Her kiss was hard, demanding, a stark contrast to the quiet domesticity of our surroundings. "Here?" I gasped, trying to push her away. Someone could walk in. "That's the point," she whispered against my mouth, her hands fumbling with the button of my jeans. "Don't you ever get tired of playing it safe?" The sheer, breathtaking recklessness of it was terrifying, yet a dark, shameful part of me was electrified by it. We were committing the ultimate act of defilement, not in the secrecy of a dark car, but in the mundane heart of her family home, just feet away from her husband and daughter. It was a brief, frantic, and utterly sordid encounter, a clumsy and almost silent act of mutual destruction set to the rhythmic tumbling of wet clothes. We were lost in the madness of it when the sound shattered our sordid little bubble. It was the distinct, heavy sound of David's office door creaking open upstairs. We froze, our bodies locked together, every muscle tensed. Then came the footsteps, slow and heavy on the hardwood floor above us, moving towards the staircase. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. We broke apart in a silent, clumsy panic, a desperate scramble of limbs and fumbled clothing. My mind went completely blank with terror. This was it, the end of the world. Then, his voice boomed through the house, closer than I expected. "Helen? Have you seen my blue blazer?" I can't find it anywhere. The sound was coming from the bottom of the stairs, just around the corner from the kitchen, from the laundry room. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. I looked at Helen. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated terror, her eyes wide, her skin pale beneath her summer tan. She frantically wiped at my mouth with the back of her hand, her own lipstick smeared across her lips. The footsteps started again, coming towards the kitchen. Towards us, we heard the soft scuff of his expensive loafers on the tiled kitchen floor. He was feet away. We were trapped. There was nowhere to run. My entire life, my future with Chloe, her family's image, all of it, flashed before my eyes, about to be incinerated in the next 5 seconds. The footsteps stopped directly outside the laundry room door. Silence. Then the doorknob, a polished brass lever, began to turn. The sound was the loudest thing I had ever heard in my life. The door swung inward. David stood there, filling the doorway, an imposing figure holding a sheaf of papers. He looked from Helen, who was trying to look busy examining a bottle of bleach, to me as I stood frozen, pretending to be fascinated by the lint trap of the dryer. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, narrowed, taking in the scene. He saw 2 people, standing too far apart, in a small, enclosed space. He saw my flushed face and her smeared lipstick. He saw our ragged breathing and the palpable, vibrating tension in the air. "What's going on in here?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. A long, agonizing second of silence passed. Helen, a seasoned veteran in the art of domestic deception, found her voice first. "Oh, David," she said, her tone a little too high, a little too bright. "You startled me. Liam was just helping me. This dreadful machine is making that thumping noise again." The lie was plausible, but paper-thin. David's gaze shifted to me. He held my eyes for what felt like an eternity. It was a look of cold, calculated evaluation. He didn't believe her. I could see it in his eyes. He didn't know what he had walked in on. Not exactly, but he knew he had walked in on something. The seed of suspicion, a dark and venomous thing, was planted. "I see," he said slowly, his eyes still locked on mine. He held the gaze for another moment, a silent assertion of power, before finally turning his attention back to Helen. "Well, my blazer isn't going to find itself." He turned and walked out of the kitchen, his footsteps receding as he went back upstairs. The moment he was gone, the adrenaline that had been holding me upright vanished, and I felt my knees go weak. I leaned back against the washing machine, my body trembling uncontrollably. Helen had her eyes closed, her hand pressed to her chest as she took deep, shuddering breaths. The thrill was gone. The excitement, the recklessness, it had all evaporated in the face of that cold, hard reality. We had come within a hair's breadth of total annihilation. I looked at Helen, at her pale, shaken face, and I didn't see a seductive, mysterious woman. I saw a stranger, a co-conspirator who had almost led me off a cliff. I had to get out. I mumbled a half-coherent excuse to her and fled the room. I found Chloe upstairs, told her I was feeling sick, that I had a sudden migraine. The lie was flimsy, but she was too absorbed in her music to question it. I gave her a quick, clumsy kiss on the forehead and left, the entire walk out of that house feeling like a parade of shame under the suspicious eyes I imagined were watching me from every window. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away. I pulled over on the shoulder of a deserted road, the engine ticking in the quiet afternoon, and I finally let the tremors take over my body. The game was over. I had just survived a round of Russian roulette, the click of the empty chamber still echoing in my ears. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my very soul that I couldn't pull the trigger again. The risk was no longer a thrill, it was a promise of obliteration. I had to end it. I had to end it before it ended me. The terror of that moment in the laundry room did not fade. It lingered, a cold, metallic taste in the back of my throat, a permanent tremor in my hands. The adrenaline of the near miss had burned away any last, lingering trace of illicit thrill, leaving behind only the stark, skeletal reality of the consequences. My life, my future, the heart of the woman I loved, I had placed it all on a roulette wheel and spun it, just for the sick, intoxicating rush. I had come within one click of losing everything. That realization became my mantra, a frantic, looping thought that gave me no peace. It had to end. Not later, not gradually, but now, and with a finality as brutal and decisive as an amputation. For 3 days, I lived like a fugitive. I ignored her calls, which went from pleading to demanding. I deleted her texts without reading them, the sight of her name on my screen sending a jolt of pure panic through me. I made excuses to Chloe, claiming a mountain of prep work for the coming semester, avoiding her house, the scene of the crime, as if it were radioactive. But I knew this cowardice was only a temporary solution. An affair like ours, a secret built on such a volatile foundation, couldn't be ended with a ghosting. It was a chemical fire that had to be deliberately, carefully extinguished, not just left to smolder. I knew I had to face her. I had to say the words out loud, to sever the connection with the clean, undeniable edge of my own voice. It was the only way to reclaim any shred of control, to begin the impossible work of becoming the man I was before I had destroyed him. With trembling hands, I composed a text, keeping it short, clinical, and devoid of any emotion. We need to talk. Not at the house. The Milltown Cafe. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. By choosing a neutral public location, I was trying to build a firewall, to create an environment where the raw, messy emotions I anticipated could be contained by the presence of strangers. I was setting the terms, a desperate attempt to seize the power that I had so foolishly given away. When she replied with a simple, "Okay," I felt a small, hollow victory. The next day I arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early. I chose a small, secluded booth in the back corner, a strategic position where we could talk with a semblance of privacy. I rehearsed my speech over and over in my head, a litany of regret and resolve. I would be firm, I told myself. I would be clear. I would not let her manipulate me with tears or seduce me with nostalgia. This was an ending. She arrived exactly at 2, gliding into the cafe with her usual unassailable grace. She was wearing a simple, elegant blue dress and sunglasses that she slid up into her hair. She looked calm, beautiful, and completely unreadable. "Liam," she said, her voice even as she slid into the booth opposite me. "This is a surprise. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. My courage was a finite resource, and I needed to spend it before it evaporated. Helen," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "I can't do this anymore." Her smile, which had been polite and questioning, faltered slightly. "Do what, dear?" she asked, her voice still soft. "This," I said, gesturing vaguely between us. "Us. What we've been doing. It has to stop. It was a mistake from the beginning, a terrible, insane mistake, and it has gone way too far." The words came tumbling out, a clumsy torrent of my fear and guilt. The other day, with David, my God, Helen, we could have lost everything. I could have lost Chloe. I finally risked a look at her face, expecting to see anger, or hurt, or tears. I saw none of those things. For a moment, a flicker of what looked like genuine pain crossed her features. She looked down at her hands, clasped on the table. "A mistake," she repeated, the words barely a whisper. "So that's all it was to you." I steeled myself. This was the emotional appeal I had expected. "Yes," I said, my voice hardening. "It was, and it's over." I sat back, my part said, my declaration made. I had done it. I had ended it. And then she looked up. The hurt in her eyes was gone, replaced by something that made the hair on my arm stand up. It was a look of cold, clear, calculating intelligence. The mask of the lonely, fragile woman didn't just slip. She took it off and set it aside. Her entire demeanor shifted. She leaned forward, the warmth draining from her voice, leaving behind something sharp and metallic. "A mistake," she said again, But this time it was not a question. It was an accusation. Don't you dare, Liam. Don't you dare try to minimize what this was to make yourself feel better. Was it a mistake when you sat by the pool and told me about your dreams to be a journalist? Was it a mistake when you listened to me, when you made me feel seen for the first time in a decade? You can't reduce every secret we shared, every moment of connection, to some cheap, sordid physical mistake. Her words were like expertly thrown knives, each one finding its mark, twisting my own empathy and using it as a weapon against me. She was right. It hadn't just been physical. I had been her confidant, her emotional savior, and that connection was a far more complicated thing to sever. I started, but she cut me off, her voice dropping to a low, venomous whisper that wouldn't carry past our booth. You think you can just walk away from me? From this? After everything I've shared with you, after everything you've shown me? She leaned even closer, her eyes boring into mine. We have something, you and I. A bond. You don't just get to decide one day that it's over, that it was all a mistake and erase it. That's not how it works. And then came the final, devastating blow, the words that would become the bars of my new prison. It would be a terrible shame if Chloe were to find out about us, she said, her tone deceptively sweet. Not just about the physical parts, but about the connection. About how her boyfriend cared so deeply for her lonely mother that he just had to comfort her again and again. How do you think she would understand that kind of intense, emotional mistake? I was paralyzed, stunned into absolute silence. It wasn't an overt threat. It was something far more insidious, a piece of masterful emotional blackmail. She had taken my own justifications for the affair, my sympathy for her, my role as her listener, and twisted them into a narrative that would utterly destroy Chloe, a narrative of a deep, emotional betrayal that was somehow even worse than the physical one. I had walked into that cafe feeling terrified but resolved, thinking I was ending a dangerous liaison. I now realized I had completely misunderstood the situation. This was never an affair I could just end. It was a trap, and I had not only walked into it, I had helped her build it around me. The power I thought I was taking back had never been mine to begin with. She had always held it. The vulnerable, lonely woman was gone, and in her place sat my judge, my jury, and my warden. My affair with Helen was over. My life as her hostage had just begun. The walk out of that cafe was a walk into a new, more terrifying phase of my existence. The acute, panicked fear of being discovered was replaced by the chronic, grinding horror of being owned. I was no longer a partner in a secret. I was a hostage. My life ceased to be my own. It became a performance, dictated by the silent, menacing whims of my captor. Helen never needed to text me demands anymore. Her power was absolute, and she wielded it with a quiet, suffocating precision. When we were at the house, a flick of her eyes towards the kitchen was a summons I had to obey, leading to a tense, silent moment where she would brush against me, her touch no longer a caress, but a branding, a reminder of my servitude. If I seemed too happy with Chloe, too lost in a moment of genuine affection, she would find a way to shatter it. A well-placed, knowing glance in my direction. A seemingly innocent question laced with double meaning that only I could understand. Liam looks a little tired today, Chloe. Are you sure you're getting enough sleep, dear? Every word was a reminder, a tightening of the leash. I existed in a state of perpetual, high-strung vigilance. My love for Chloe, once the central, life-affirming force in my world, became a source of constant, agonizing pain. Every laugh we shared felt like a betrayal. Every time she said, "I love you," the words were a judgment, a confirmation of the man I had failed to be. I was a phantom in my own relationship, going through the motions of love while my soul was screaming in a locked room. Chloe, in her infinite, heartbreaking patience, tried to reach me. She knew something was fundamentally broken, but she couldn't see the cause. Our relationship was a house with a rotting foundation, and she was trying to fix it by repainting the walls, unaware that the entire structure was about to collapse. The end of summer arrived not with a gentle fade, but like the fall of a guillotine. It was time to go back to school, back to a life that was supposed to represent the future, a future I now felt I had completely forfeited. To mark the occasion, Helen and David decided to host one last family dinner, a farewell to summer, that felt to me like a final, formal sentencing. The evening was a masterpiece of suburban tension. David was unusually present, his gaze lingering on me with a cold, unreadable suspicion that never wavered. Chloe, trying desperately to salvage the last embers of our perfect summer, chattered with a forced brightness that was painful to watch. And Helen presided over it all, a gracious, smiling queen, ruling over a feast of ashes. The final confrontation, the moment that extinguished my last pathetic spark of hope, happened in the kitchen. Chloe had sent me to help Helen clear the main course. The room was warm, filled with the scent of rosemary and regret. As I stacked plates by the sink, my back to her, I decided to make one last, desperate plea. My voice was a low, defeated whisper. "Helen, please. We're leaving. Let this be the end. Just let me go. For Chloe's sake. Please." I heard her set down a stack of silverware. There was a long, heavy silence, punctuated only by the hum of the refrigerator. I felt her presence behind me, her voice cool and steady by my ear. "Let you go?" she said, her tone devoid of all emotion. "Liam, you still don't understand, do you? There is no letting go. You and I are a story now. There is no epilogue where we walk away. We are a permanent part of each other's narrative." I turned to face her, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. She was wiping a wine glass with a cloth, her movements calm and deliberate. She didn't even look at me. "If you ever, for 1 second," she continued, her voice dropping even lower, "think about ending this story, about walking away from your part in it, I will simply tell a different version of it. I will go to Chloe, my eyes filled with tears, and I will tell her the story of a lonely, vulnerable, neglected wife who was preyed upon by her daughter's handsome, charming boyfriend. I will tell her how you saw my sadness and twisted it, how you took advantage of me in my own home. I will be the victim, Liam, and you will be the monster. Now tell me." She finally looked up, her eyes as hard and cold as river stones. "Who do you think our sweet, loving Chloe will believe?" The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. It was the most evil, most brilliantly cruel thing I had ever heard. She had not only trapped me, she had crafted the very nature of my prison. She would not just expose me, she would rewrite me, turning my weakness, my guilt, my sin, into a story of pure, predatory villainy. I had no defense. I was checkmated. I just stood there, speechless, as she finished drying the glass and placed it perfectly in the cabinet. The rest of the dinner passed in a silent, horrified haze. When it was finally time to leave, Chloe hugged her parents goodbye. I did the same, my movements stiff and robotic. As Helen embraced me, a brief, formal hug for her daughter's benefit, she leaned in close. Her lips brushed against my ear, and her perfume, the scent of my damnation, filled my senses one last time. "This was a memorable summer, wasn't it, Liam?" she whispered, her voice a silken threat. "Make sure you never, ever forget it." Driving away from that house, with Chloe chattering beside me about packing and class schedules, I finally understood the true nature of my punishment. It wasn't the fear of being caught, an explosion, a confession, a dramatic ending that would have been a kind of release, a cauterizing of the wound. No, my sentence was far more insidious. My punishment was to live. It was to sit here, next to the woman I adored, and to be a lie. It was to go back to school and pretend to have a future. It was to carry the ghost of that summer, the weight of that secret, and the chill of that final threat with me, every single day, for the rest of my life. The point of no return had not been in her bed, or in my car, or even in that cafe. It was here, now, in this moment of absolute clarity. I realized that my life was no longer my own. The affair was over, but the consequences were a life sentence, and I had to serve it in silence, in a prison built for one, with the ghost of Helen as my eternal warden. Summer collapsed into autumn, and the world changed its colors. The leaves on campus turned to brilliant shades of crimson and gold, a beautiful, dying fire that I was too numb to appreciate. I went to classes, I wrote papers, I existed. I became a masterful actor, playing the part of a normal college student, a loving boyfriend. Chloe and I stayed together, a testament to her loyalty and my cowardice. Our relationship became a carefully preserved photograph of something that had once been alive. We held hands, but the space between our palms was a universe of unspoken secrets. We kissed, but my lips were a liar's. The seasons turned, But my sentence remained the same, a cold, unending winter in my soul. And then, it was Thanksgiving. We drove to her parents' house, the car filled with a tense, brittle silence that we both pretended was just tiredness from a long semester. The house was exactly the same, a perfect, gleaming monument to the life I had helped defile. The air inside was warm and smelled of roasted turkey and cinnamon, a manufactured scent of family and gratitude that felt like a bitter mockery. The dinner was a masterclass in denial. We all sat around the polished dining table, passing gravy and exchanging pleasantries, each of us playing our assigned part in the grand, tragic play of the perfect family. David was polite but distant, his eyes occasionally settling on me with a disquieting weight, the ghost of his suspicions still lingering. Chloe, my sweet, unknowing Chloe, tried her best to bridge the silent chasms between us all, her cheerful chatter the only thing keeping the crushing weight of everything unsaid from collapsing the entire room. And Helen. Helen was magnificent. She was the gracious hostess, the loving mother, the devoted wife. She moved around the table, refilling wine glasses, laughing at jokes, a portrait of serene contentment. But every so often, she would look at me. It was never for long, never long enough for Chloe to notice. But her gaze would find mine, and in that fleeting moment, a silent, chilling message would pass between us. You are mine. You will never be free. Smile. And I would smile, the muscles in my face aching from the effort, a terrified puppet dancing on the end of her invisible strings. At one point, Chloe, sensing my tension, reached for my hand under the table. I took it, my fingers cold and lifeless against her warm, trusting skin. She squeezed, a silent question. Are you okay? I squeezed back, a silent lee. I'm fine. After the meal, as the family drifted into the living room, lulled into a tryptophan haze, I found myself cornered into helping Helen with the dishes. It was a scene we had played out before, but the context was different now. This was not a moment of seduction, it was a demonstration of power. The warm, soapy water, the domestic clatter of plates, the quiet intimacy of the kitchen, it was all part of my prison. We worked in silence for several minutes, a shared, practiced rhythm. I scraped the plates. She rinsed them and placed them in the dishwasher. It was a disturbingly normal scene, a husband and wife routine that we had no right to. We both reached for the same serving platter at the same time. The back of her hand brushed against mine, a touch that was as light as a whisper but landed on my skin like a hot iron. I flinched, pulling my hand back. She didn't acknowledge it. She simply rinsed the platter and slid it into the rack. Then, as she turned to take another plate from me, she leaned in, her voice so low it was barely a vibration in the air between us. I miss you, she breathed. The words were not a confession of longing. They were a reminder, a key turning in the lock of my cell, a quiet, devastating assertion of her permanent ownership of my past, my present, and my future. My blood ran cold, I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. I just stood there, paralyzed, as she finished her work, her movements calm and unhurried. I looked past her, through the doorway into the living room. David was dozing in his armchair, and Chloe was on the sofa, laughing. She was looking at a photo album with one of her aunts, her head thrown back in a moment of pure, unadulterated joy. Her smile was the most beautiful, most painful thing I had ever seen. It was the smile of a woman who still believed in goodness, in love, in me. And she was a million miles away, in a world of light I could no longer enter, and she had no idea. That is the image that is burned into my memory, the final, haunting frame of my story. I didn't get caught. The bomb never went off. On the surface, I didn't lose Chloe, but the truth is I lost everything. I lost the right to deserve her. I lost the man I was, the boy who could look her in the eye without a universe of lies shadowing his own. The real tragedy is not the story of a secret that was revealed, but of one that was kept. My punishment is not a dramatic, fiery end, but a quiet, unending existence in the wreckage. I have to live every day in the poisoned paradise I created, to sit across from the woman I love and know that our life together is a beautiful, hollow thing. The summer of stolen glances is over, but for me, it never ends. I am forever 21, standing in a quiet kitchen on a Thanksgiving evening, trapped between the woman who owns my past and the woman whose future I have already destroyed.